What's happening right now between the US and Russia is a mountain, not a molehill. Let me explain. So let me first say, I am in the distinguishing mountains from molehills business, right? I don't think everything Donald Trump does and says is a mountain. I don't think we have to be outraged by everything. I don't think everything he says is a huge deal. I think plenty of that stuff is molehills. At the same time, I do think there are mountains out there, and I think what we are seeing in terms of how the U.S. under Donald Trump is reimagining and realigning the alliances of the world does really matter. And I know it's foreign policy, and I know people don't like to pay attention to it, but you need to pay attention to it, and let me explain to you why. All right, so let's just do a little bit of scene setting. So in the last week, a bunch of things have happened. First of all, Donald Trump, via Truth Social, told us that he had an extended conversation with Vladimir Putin, where Putin had, among other things, agreed with Donald Trump's push for common sense as it related to the world, I suppose. Now, we learned from Russia that phone call went on for about 90 minutes. All right, so that's piece one. Piece two, Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, was doing a call, and he said, among other things, that it was not reasonable for Ukraine to expect that any sort of settlement between Russia and Ukraine would return Ukraine to the borders it had before Russia invaded 3 years ago. Okay, that's piece two. Piece three, JD Vance, the Vice President of the United States, was at the Munich Security Conference, big international conference attended by prime ministers and foreign ministers, and, a real moment for JD Vance on the world stage. And what he said, and I'm paraphrasing, but only slightly here, what JD Vance said was, the real threat was not from China or Russia to Europe. The real threat was, in fact, within their own countries, within European countries, because European countries had been suppressing free speech and not allowing populist movements to rise up in their own countries. That was the real threat, that was what America was most worried about when it came to that part of the world. Okay. Fast forward to this week in Saudi Arabia, in Riyadh, Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, among other top diplomats for the Trump administration, are in Riyadh having at least the beginning of talks with the Russians of what a framework for a ceasefire or a peace settlement might look like. So look, I get it. This all feels very far away to lots and lots of people. What's happening in Riyadh or what's happening in Ukraine and Russia, what happened in Munich at a security conference, I get it. But this stuff matters because, look, here's the reality. Every president, Democrat and Republican, since World War II has basically operated under the same set of alliances. Europe, good. Russia, bad. I'm being overly simplistic, but only sort of, right? That has been the setup, that Europe, our European allies were people we were going to rely on, people we were going to work with, people were going to help keep Russia and to some extent China in place to sort of monitor them because they were better positioned than we could since we're separated by an ocean. That was sort of how, whether it's Richard Nixon or LBJ or Obama or George W. Bush or George H.W. Bush or Biden, that's broadly how they thought of it. Now, they envisioned sort of different roles for America. Obviously, George W. Bush thought America should be effectively the world's policeman, installing democracy across the world. Others didn't view it exactly that way. So they've all had their own differing views. But within this broad framework, which is European allies, good, need to work with them. Russia, broadly speaking, not great, need to be suspicious of. Okay. That appears to be changing. And I say appears to because, look, we're a month, a little less than Donald Trump was sworn in on January 20th. It's February 18th. So we're less than a month in, but that appears to be changing. Let me pause here. I just want to make sure people know I need you to subscribe to my channel. I need you to support me. This is what I do for a living. If you want this, which is calling balls and strikes, no matter what uniform the batter at the plate is wearing. Subscribe now. All right, so back to why this has changed. Trump has, during the campaign, but definitely since he's been in office, he's clearly more willing to be friendly to Russia than we have seen in the past. His conversation with Vladimir Putin last week was the first time an American president had talked to Putin directly since Russia invaded Ukraine 3-ish years ago. Joe Biden never spoke to him after that time. Sending representatives to Saudi Arabia to negotiate, or at least negotiate the negotiations with the Russians, without Ukrainians involved, without the Europeans involved, is not something that I think any post-World War II president would have done before Trump. It is simply different. And this is a tectonic shift. This isn't a small shift. This is a big shift. Because if, let's say, Russia and the United States work out some sort of agreement where they're going to carve up Ukraine, and they go to Ukraine and the U.S. says, look, we're not going to give you any more money unless you accept this. Ukraine will probably be forced to accept. What lesson does that send to Vladimir Putin? It says, well, I invaded this country and I got some land out of it. Now it cost tens of thousands of Russian lives, maybe hundreds of thousands of Russian lives, but I got some land out of it. So what is to stop Vladimir Putin from saying, well, what about all these Baltic republics that used to be part of the USSR? Why don't we go and take some of them back? What's to stop that if we incentivize in some way him launching a war against Ukraine? Again, to be clear, Ukraine did not seek this. This is a war that Vladimir Putin saw started, and Ukraine was forced to defend itself. So it is a very, it is setting a precedent. I guess we can argue whether it's a good precedent or a bad precedent. I would argue that the reason that we've had these post-World War II alliances is because they've kept us out of World War III. So I would argue they are of value. I would also argue Donald Trump didn't really campaign on this. He talked about how he was going to end the Russia-Ukraine war, but not really that he was going to mostly talk to Russia about that and then kind of loop Ukraine in and cut Europe out of it entirely. I think the Europeans are startled. I think they are scared. I think they are shocked. If you are pro-Trump, you'll say, good. Europe has taken us for granted for too long. Maybe, but I would again argue there are short-term gains and long-term pains here, right? If we treat our allies like our adversaries and our adversaries like our allies, history would suggest that does not end well for us or for them, our allies. And so I do think, look, I know foreign policy isn't sexy. I know it's much more interesting to focus on something happening like this one doesn't like that one in domestic politics. And I do some of that, but this is important. And I wanted to make a video about it for that reason. This is a fundamental shift in American foreign policy. Does it continue? What is the deal? Is there a deal that is ultimately cut? Is Ukraine involved in these conversations ultimately or not? Is Ukraine just sort of told this is the deal, take it or leave it? Obviously, that will have an impact going forward on what this means for American foreign policy and our global alliances. But I will tell you, the last 7 days have absolutely shaken things up in a major way. Yes, I know that is Donald Trump's goal in all things, is to shake things up. But I would argue that when we shake things up, we risk unintended consequences, and we could be heading toward those. Okay, I'll stop there. As always, subscribe to this channel, like this video, comment on this video, do it for the algorithm, and tell your friends about what I am doing here. We are almost to 60,000 subscribers. We are marching forward. Again, daily videos on politics, as well as live streams, YouTube shorts. I am all over this platform, people. I need you to support me. Take good care of yourselves.